For her sake, Ned had built a small sept where she might sing to the 7 faces of God, but the blood of the first men still flowed in the veins of the Starks, and his own gods were the old ones, the nameless, faceless gods of the greenwood they shared with the vanished children of the forest. At the center of the grove, an ancient weirwood brooded over a small pool where the waters were black and cold. The heart tree, Ned called it. The weirwood's bark was white as bone, its leaves dark red, like 1,000 blood-stained hands. A face had been carved in the trunk of the great tree, its features long and melancholy, the deep-cut eyes red with dried sap and strangely watchful. They were old, those eyes, older than Winterfell itself. They had seen Brandon the Builder set the first stone if the tales were true. They had watched the castle's granite walls rise around them. It was said that the children of the forest had carved faces in the trees during the dawn centuries before the coming of the first men across the narrow sea. In the south, the last weirwoods had been cut down or burned out 1,000 years ago, except on the Isle of Faces where the green men kept their silent watch. Up here it was different. Here every castle had its godswood, and every godswood had its heart tree, and every heart tree its face. The weirwood trees are a huge part of the religious and fantasy element to A Song of Ice and Fire. Nearly every character in the story has an encounter with the magical trees, and typically the experience is unnerving. These trees are hugely important to the story, and although Game of Thrones left many questions unanswered, I do believe they will play a much bigger part in the books, and in fact they will probably be preyed upon as a weapon against the North in the wars to come. George R. R. Martin has said that the end of A Song of Ice and Fire will be similar to the ending of the Lord of the Rings series. If you are unfamiliar with the ending in the books, the final chapters are about when the hobbits return to the Shire after the War of the Ring, only to find their peaceful homeland ravaged and war-torn. This is a much more realistic view of war than just the happily ever after tale, and George's story has definitely tried to portray the awful realities of war for us. Similarly, the scouring of the Shire was left out of the movies, so we can play with the idea of the 2 stories having similar endings that we did not get to see. Knowing how the show played out, in the books we will likely see a big battle at Winterfell during the oncoming Long Night. Will the weirwood trees be a target, or key to destroying the Three-Eyed Raven? Or perhaps this will have to occur on the Isle of Faces where the Green Men tend a sacred weirwood grove. The trees are used for communication, information, and to see through the eyes of other weirwoods in other locations. If destroying the Three-Eyed Raven is the target in the Long Night, as seen in the show, then likely a huge part of eliminating him would be destroying the weirwood trees, from which he draws his powers. We have not seen evidence of this in the books so far. Bloodraven lives beneath an enormous weirwood north of the Wall, and there is a huge grove north of the Wall where the Black Brothers take their vows, and wildlings gather as a sacred place. The sun was sinking below the trees when they reached their destination, a small clearing in the deep of the wood where 9 weirwoods grew in a rough circle. John drew in a breath, and he saw Sam Tarly staring. Even in the Wolf's Wood you never found more than 2 or 3 of the white trees growing together. A grove of 9 was unheard of. The forest floor was carpeted with fallen leaves, blood red on top, black rot beneath. The wide, smooth trunks were bone pale, and 9 faces stared inward. The dried sap that crusted in the eyes was red and hard as rubies. Bowen Marsh commanded them to leave their horses outside the circle. This is a sacred place. We will not defile it. When they entered the grove, Samwell Tarly turned slowly, looking at each face in turn. No 2 were quite alike. "They're watching us," he whispered. "The old gods." According to the show, the children of the forest created the Night King because the first men were destroying their sacred trees. His method of fighting was to kill the living men and, in turn, created a dead army under his thraldom. He had a Night's Queen, according to legend, and they enslaved the Night's Watch. The Stark in Winterfell, Brandon the Breaker, and the King Beyond the Wall, Joramun, joined to fight off the dead. The children created the Three-Eyed Raven to combat the Night King, and together they trapped the dead north of the Wall. The children aligned themselves with men and created the Pact. They agreed to stop cutting down the trees, created the Order of Green Men to protect and preserve the weirwood trees and their ancient knowledge. You can start to see why the Night King might be vengeful. From what we've seen, he was a man who likely sacrificed himself to help the children in their plight. Then they turned on him for his manner of defense, trapped him behind a giant ice wall, and killed his army. His wife was probably killed. Now he seeks the children's weapon against him, the knowledge base from the magical trees, and the ability to possibly affect history via time travel. He wants to kill the three-eyed raven, and it may be safe to assume that a huge part of that is to destroy the weirwood trees. The three-eyed raven is intrinsically linked to the weirwood trees and draws his strength and knowledge from them. What sort of effect would damaging or destroying a weirwood have on Bran or Bloodraven? Would it kill them, or just destroy their abilities? It seems that it could be a goal of the walkers if we see them given the target of the three-eyed raven. At this point in the books, we have not met a leader figure for the others. They seem to be more aimless in the books. Their goal, from what we have seen, is to kill and add to their army. Other than the prologue chapter with Waymar Royce, and when taking Craster's sons from the woods, do we see any sentient White Walkers, just bloodthirsty others who kill anyone with hot blood in their veins. We don't know their goal or their reasons, just as we didn't learn that information in the show. Bran does tell us in the show in Season 8 that the Night King wants to destroy the memories of man and take mankind into his dead army for an eternal night. There are weirwoods in the north and in every godswood at the northern castles and holdfasts. We see evidence that the trees are still given sacrifice in the old ways. The trees absorb blood, so historically they were in locations for executions, or as we see in Winterfell, it is where Ned cleans his sword after it's used, in the black pool beneath the Godswood tree. The Winterfell heart tree has a face, long and melancholy, much like Ned's face. In White Harbor, the great weirwood tree located in the Wolf's Den Inner Godswood, located within an inner courtyard, has grown to a massive size and has an angry face, much like the Lord of White Harbor, Wyman Manderly, who is also a Knight of the Order of the Green Hand. You notice that the tree begins to take on the face of whoever is making the sacrifices to the tree. Yet our way is the older way. The blood of the first men still flows in the veins of the Starks, and we hold to the belief that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. We see other ways the heart trees affect the characters in our story, even those who do not necessarily worship the old gods. Ned takes his daughters to the Godswood heart tree in King's Landing, where they knelt to offer their thanksgiving as if it were a weirwood. Sansa sleeps beneath the tree, which is actually a great oak tree with a carved face, and she wakes surrounded by blooms of dragon's breath. She had dreams of Bran smiling. Jaime Lannister also sleeps upon a weirwood stump when he leaves Harrenhal after having his hand cut off. His party makes camp and Jaime rests his head upon a stump to sleep. He has vivid dreams of being under Casterly Rock with ghosts of his Kingsguard brothers, his father, Cersei, and Brienne haunting him and the choices he has made as a knight. A shroud of his mother appears to him, crying about the man he's become. When he wakes, he realizes he's been sleeping on a stump with white bark, and he thinks of Ned and Winterfell. After this dream is when he decides he must return to Harrenhal to rescue Brienne, a notable moment for Jaime's character arc. Whether one worships the old gods or the new, or no gods at all, the weirwood trees are known by most every man in the realm. They are sacred and powerful, and wars have been fought for them. They are slightly fearful to look upon. In The Lord of the Rings, the mallorn trees are very special trees that grow in Lothlorien, which is where the High Elves Galadriel and Celeborn live. The trees have white bark with green and silver leaves in the spring and summer, and the leaves turn golden through winter. The trees were originally grown in the Valinor, and were eventually gifted to the men of Númenor. The tree nuts were taken to the mainland of Middle-earth, but the elves of Lindon had trouble getting them to grow. However, Galadriel took with her some seeds to Lothlorien when she moved to that land and grew a great grove of mallorn. The elves built their homes on great platforms in the trees called Talain. Frodo says he can feel the life within the tree when he touches one in Lothlorien. As Frodo prepared to follow him, he laid his hand upon the tree beside the ladder. Never before had he been so suddenly and so keenly aware of the feel and texture of the tree's skin and the life within it. He felt a delight in the wood and the touch of it, neither as a forester nor a carpenter. It was the delight of the living tree itself. There are many examples within Lord of the Rings of life and power within the trees, or trees and nature fighting back against industrialism. That is a core message throughout the story as a whole. A huge part of Saruman and Sauron's representation is that of industrialism in a modernizing society. They work with steel and genetic engineering with the orcs. They clear-cut forests for firewood to feed their forges. Treebeard and the other Ents fight back against Isengard and Saruman when Fangorn Forest is clear-cut. Tolkien's creation story of Arda, the Earth, has the story of the two trees of the Valinor, which provided light to the world. They were destroyed by Melkor and Ungoliant, but the tree's last flower and fruit became the sun and moon, so the light never went out of the world. "For you, little gardener and lover of trees," she said to Sam, "I have only a small gift." She put into his hand a little box of plain gray wood, unadorned save for a single silver rune upon the lid. "Here is set G for Galadriel," she said, "but also it may stand for garden in your tongue. In this box there is earth from my orchard, and such a blessing as Galadriel has to bestow is upon it. It will not keep you on your road, nor defend you against any peril, but if you keep it and see your home again at last, then perhaps it may reward you. Though you should find all barren and laid to waste, there will be few gardens in Middle-earth that will bloom like your garden if you sprinkle this earth there. Then you may remember Galadriel, and catch a glimpse far off of Lorien that you have only seen in our winter. For our spring and our summer are gone by, and they will never be seen again on earth save in memory." Sam went red to the ears and muttered something inaudible as he clutched the box and bowed as well as he could. You almost get a familiar feeling to Sam Tarly bearing the Horn of Winter on his journey throughout Westeros in the way Sam Gamgee treasures the little gray box. The rest of the elven rope he carefully coiled and put back into his pack. Beside that, he kept only the remnants of the waybread and the water bottle and Sting still hanging by his belt, and hidden away in the pocket of his tunic next to his breast the phial of Galadriel and the little box that she gave him for his own. "They've cut it down!" cried Sam. "They cut down the party tree!" He pointed to where the tree had stood under which Bilbo had made his farewell speech. It was lying lopped and dead in the field. As if this were the last straw, Sam burst into tears. The party tree in the Shire is of significant importance to the locals. It is a place of gathering, not so much a sacred place as a place of good fortune and fond memories. After the War of the Ring, Saruman and his men, including Grima Wormtongue, invaded the Shire and enslaved the hobbits. They destroyed the town and cut down the party tree. The trees were the worst loss and damage, for at Sharky's bidding they had been cut down recklessly far and wide over the Shire, and Sam grieved over this more than anything else. For one thing, this hurt would take long to heal, and only his great-grandchildren, he thought, would see the Shire as it ought to be. Then, suddenly one day, he remembered the gift of Galadriel. He brought the box out and showed it to the other travelers, and asked their advice. "I wondered when you'd think of it," said Frodo. "Open it." Inside it was filled with a gray dust, soft and fine, in the middle of which was a seed, like a small nut with a silver shale. "What shall I do with this?" said Sam. "Throw it in the air on a breezy day, and let it do its work," said Pippin. "On what?" said Sam. "Choose one spot as a nursery, and see what happens to the plants there," said Merry. but I'm sure my lady would not like me to keep it all for my own garden, now that so many folk have suffered," said Sam. "Use all the wits and knowledge you have of your own, Sam," said Frodo, "and then use the gift to help your work and better it, and use it sparingly. There is not much here, and I expect every grain has value." So Sam planted saplings in all the places where specially beautiful or beloved trees had been destroyed, and he put a grain of the precious dust in the soil at the root of each. He went up and down the Shire in this labor, but if he paid special attention to Hobbiton and Bywater, no one blamed him. And at the end he found that he had a little of the dust left, so he went to 3 Farthing Stone, which is as near the center of the Shire as no matter, and cast it in the air with his blessing. The little silver nut he planted in the party field where the tree had once been, and he wondered what would come of it. All through winter he remained as patient as he could, and tried to restrain himself from going round constantly to see if anything was happening. Spring surpassed his wildest hopes. His trees began to sprout and grow, as if time were in a hurry and wished to make 1 year do for 20. In the party field, a beautiful young sapling leaped up. It had silver bark and long leaves, and burst into golden flowers in April. It was indeed a mallorn, and it was the wonder of the neighborhood. In after years, as it grew in grace and beauty, it was known far and wide, and people would come long journeys to see it. The only mallorn west of the mountains and east of the sea, and one of the finest in the world. If we consider the last of the Starks, we might think upon the Fellowship of the Ring and the 4 hobbits who set out from the Shire. They go through so many things, fighting for mankind, killing the enemy of man, and become honored friends of the King of Gondor and heroes of the realm. But when they return to their home, it is destroyed, and they have to take it back from enemies, much like we have seen with Winterfell on several occasions. Perhaps in the books we will see something like this, A Dream of Spring. The Long Night will likely take a bit longer than what we saw in the show, but with that will come devastation, hunger, death, carnage. The White Walkers attacking Winterfell in the manner we saw in the show would leave much behind to repair. Cleaning up bodies would take some time, for one thing. I think we could potentially see someone like Euron leading the attack on Winterfell, and with what we can gather from the pre-released Forsaken chapter, it seems that Euron is systematically gathering priests and holy men for some kind of religious oratorio or massacre with magical intentions. He is seemingly attempting to become the greatest god by making mockery of and killing religious representatives in a ritualistic fashion. There is evidence of him also having green seer abilities and perhaps being contacted by Bloodraven. There are many theories within the fandom that Euron may be a failed student of Bloodraven. He had flying dreams as a child. He says he has traveled to Old Valyria and lived to tell the tale. I think he may take on the role of the Night King as we saw in the show, perhaps with the ability to lead a dead army or call them into his thraldom. He does have the Dragonbinder horn. He has a large group of religious men. He has an army of silent men and the men of the Iron Islands behind him. If he is able to call the dead into his servitude, I am sure that he would believe himself a god. This seems like the most fitting figure to take the role of the Night King. Euron is a power-hungry psychopath with an unchecked messiah complex, and we are going to see big things from him in the next books, based on what we've seen in the pre-released Forsaken chapter. "The bleeding star bespoke the end," he said to Euron. "These are the last days, when the world shall be broken and remade. A new god shall be born from the graves and charnel pits." Then Euron lifted the great horn to his lips and blew, and dragons and krakens and sphinxes came at his command and bowed before him. "Kneel, brother," the crow's eye commanded. "I am your king. I am your god. Worship me, and I will raise you up to be my priest." "Never. No godless man may sit the sea-stone chair." "Why would I want that hard black rock? Brother, look again and see where I am seated." Euron Damphair looked. The mounds of skulls were gone. Now it was metal underneath the crow's eye, a great, tall, twisted seat of razor-sharp iron, barbs and blades and broken swords, all dripping blood. Impaled upon the longer spikes were the bodies of the gods. The maiden was there, and the father and the mother, and the warrior and crone and smith, even the stranger. They hung side by side with all manner of queer foreign gods, the great shepherd and the black goat, three-headed Trios and the pale child Bacalon, and the Lord of Light and the butterfly god of Noth. And there, swollen and green, half devoured by crabs, the drowned god festered with the rest, sea-water still dripping from his hair. Then Euron Crow's-Eye laughed again, and the priest woke screaming in the bowels of silence as piss ran down his leg. It was only a dream, a vision born of foul black wine. Euron has been binge-drinking Shade of the Evening, which is produced by the ebony trees of Essos. The drink causes hallucinations and taps into green sight, similarly to weirwood paste. Dany's vision in the House of the Undying was under the influence of Shade of the Evening. Euron has been drinking the black drink heartily. Some see the ebony trees as a corrupted version of the weirwoods, being black-barked with blue leaves to the weirwoods' white bark with red leaves, both having a similar effect. Seeing the evidence and efforts Euron is putting into mocking and ending religion and the gods of other men, we might consider it pretty likely that he will seek to destroy the weirwood trees. The old gods worship the trees, they sacrifice to the trees and communicate through the trees. The Iron Islands don't have weirwoods, so the Ironborn do not see the trees as sacred and have no attachment to them. Euron is actually a perfect character to seek to destroy the weirwood trees within our story. I'm willing to bet we will see his legions beginning to not only cut down weirwoods on the mainland, but potentially try to use the wood for its magical properties, perhaps boat building with it. That would be especially offensive, and Euron is not afraid to offend the gods. He has traveled to Valyria and has many magical relics from all over the world. A weirwood ship sounds like just the thing to add to his collection of religiously offensive and priceless relics. It would also be a nod to Naga's bones, the great carcass that rests upon Naga's Hill on Old Wick in the Iron Islands. Naga was said to be a great sea dragon that the drowned god killed upon the shores of the island, and there her bones remain to this day, making it a sacred location. There are many theories out there about Naga's bones, which appear now as a giant rib cage resting on a beach, but we might consider that they could also very much resemble a wrecked ship. When a weirwood dies, it turns to stone, so a weirwood ship could very much look like a dragon's ribcage when found to petrify on a beach. It would also withstand the weather and winds of the beach through time. With this in mind, we must consider how this will affect our story as a whole. If the weirwood in Winterfell were destroyed, Bran would very likely need to get to the Isle of Faces to protect and utilize the power of the weirwoods there. Yes, there are many other weirwood trees growing in Westeros, but likely Euron is going to seek out and destroy all the weirwoods and have his men doing the same work. The Isle of Faces is the most sacred location with a weirwood grove below the neck. It is home to the Order of the Green Men, and visitors are not allowed. It is notoriously difficult to get to, nearly impossible. There are only 2 known accounts of men visiting the island. The dragon rider Adam Valerion visited upon his dragon during the Dance of Dragons before retaking Tumbleton from the 2 betrayers and the side of Aegon II. The Green Men counseled Adam to gather the lords of the Riverlands and march on Tumbleton, but that is all we know. He unfortunately died in the battle, and his dragon sea smoke. The other visitor to the Isle of Faces was Howland Reed just prior to the infamous tourney at Harrenhal. He took a boat from Greywater Watch and sailed to the island, and was actually permitted. We do not know the details of his visit, and Howland is a very secretive man, but staunchly loyal to the Starks, especially after his experience with the Green Men. His children, Mira and Jojen, are Bran's protectors and guides beyond the wall, and teach Bran all they know about his green site. They renew their ancient oath to the Starks, sworn upon ice and fire. Howland definitely has some important insight for the story as a whole, and this is something all of us readers are eagerly waiting for. There are even some who speculate that Howland could be the Knight of the Laughing Tree, though it is heavily believed to be Lyanna Stark, which gives another nod to the Weirwoods, with that being the standard on the Mystery Knight's shield. We are given countless examples of how important the sacred weirwood trees are throughout our story and to the old gods, as well as to Bran, who ultimately becomes our most important character. The trees are instrumental to Bran's powers. There is an ancient order of men dedicated to guarding these trees so they never die out from the land. The trees belong to the oldest race of sentient beings in Westeros and will not be eliminated without a huge fight. This has happened before with the First Men, and again with the Andals. George R.R. Martin has said that the ending of A Song of Ice and Fire will be similar to Lord of the Rings. The world doesn't just go back to hunky-dory after a great war. There is damage and trauma and pain and loss, rebuilding and repairing. The Scouring of the Shire was a greatly appreciated chapter and ending to an epic series because it was more realistic than the ring just being destroyed and all evil being eliminated. That just isn't logical. Reality would be coming home to your little town being destroyed, your loved ones affected. Even the safe little pocket of the Shire, which remained untouched for most any other reason, was sought after and victimized by Saruman out of revenge. He took advantage of the hobbits being away from the peaceful place they called home and ravaged and sacked the land and innocent people. The planting of the mallorn seed by Samwise was special and significant because it helped heal the broken and damaged land, but also kept some magic in the world. The mallorn trees were of the Valar, and the Shire was a blessed place after the sacred soil was laid and the new magical tree grew. Magic is important to keep alive. It is wonder, hope, and explanation for unbelievable things in this world. To eliminate all magic throws off the balance, the Song of Ice and Fire. The trees are a piece of the old world and the origins of life, and to eliminate them would completely destroy an origin of humanity, a deep and ancient memory. Losing the Weirwoods wouldn't be akin to the dying of the dragons. It would be more akin to the loss of nature itself. I believe that we will see a similar scene to the Scouring of the Shire happen in A Song of Ice and Fire, likely in Winterfell. The Weirwoods have survived through the Dawn Age, the First Men attacking them, the Andals attacking them, and the rise of the Faith of the Seven. Though the children of the forest are all but extinct, their story lives on through the trees, and that is ultimately the information that the Three-Eyed Raven bears. Does this make the Three-Eyed Raven the best ruler for the kingdoms? Well, that is for you to decide. The Weirwood remembers. Valar Morghulis.